Hi, my name is Lily Holderfield, and this is my analysis of Billy Lynn's long halftime walk. So, what is the goal of the novel and the movie? So, I broke it down here, and I said that the novel explains in detail the life of a soldier. It focuses specifically on what it's like when a soldier returns home from active duty in wartime, and covers topics like PTSD and how civilians treat military members. I actually did come to the conclusion that the novel and the movie have the same goal in the discussion of an active duty member coming home from wartime. So I said the movie arguably stays very true to the novel, and it has the same goal in the discussion of PTSD and the treatment of wartime soldiers. However, I did think that it created a deeper visual impact of the harsh realities of PTSD and active duty. So I broke down the two separate purposes that I found within the novel. So the civilian treatment of active duty members. There are many examples of how civilians treat soldiers. Throughout the movie, people at the football game are stopping Bravo to tell them thank you and how honored that they are, that Bravo is there. However, when it comes down to it, the civilians didn't actually care. It didn't really make a difference to them. And everyone at the football game just kind of acted like the soldiers were their playthings to show off. You know, having them be included in the halftime show and all, just kind of the whole course of the movie and the novel, of course. It just seemed like it was a surface level thing that they could do. Even like honoring them by bringing them to a football game seemed a little like, thank you in the smallest way we can possibly thank you. Like, it just didn't seem very genuine in the first place. It seemed like Oglesby really wanted to look like a good person, and he had the football team there. He had the soldiers at the football game. So, the examples that I have of the mistreatment of military members, the first one that really, really struck me was the conversation that the football players had with Billy. He was asking them about the football players were asking Billy about what type of guns that they use. And I wasn't too struck by this, honestly. Like, it didn't set me back. Mainly, I don't know if it's because, we are so kind of numb to the conversation of guns. Everyone wants to know, oh, what kind of gun is that? Or, how does this one shoot? Or what happened? What is this gun good for? So I feel like that conversation was very, like, numbing almost. Like, I didn't really see an issue with that. But it was what followed that when the football players asked Billy what it felt like to kill a person. So, or if he had shot anybody and what it felt like. So the reason this set me back is obviously one would go into the military knowing that that is a possibility, especially during active wartime. However, I don't think that people who sign up for the military really think about that. They kind of get hung up on the serve and protect part of it, or at least the military members that I know did. They got hung up on this idea of serving and protecting the country and not really knowing exactly what that meant. So I know that's a generalized statement, but I think it's also kind of like a good way to analyze probably how Billy felt in the military, or the way it seemed, because Billy really gave a very fake answer, in my opinion. He asked the football players, he said, well, what does it feel like when you make contact with somebody, like really make contact with them? And I just thought that that was the fakest answer possible, because obviously in the moment you might be like, oh yeah, I took down a bad guy, but at the end of the day you have to live with the fact that you killed a person. And that is traumatic. So that is something like, that's why I think Billy's answer was so fake, is he just wanted to say something to appease them. And I just thought the question of the whole conversation was a little distasteful, in my opinion. The second example I have is being battle ready. So that is a term that the stage manager used when she was discussing the uniforms that the men were going to wear during the halftime show. They were in, I honestly forget what they're called. I don't think they're called dress blues. I could be incorrect about that. That's only the term that I can remember. But they're nicer military uniforms. So she was unhappy with that. She said, we have way too many people in those uniforms. We need to have Bravo stand out. So she asked what other clothes they had, and the only other thing that they had were their DCUs, which is the desert camo uniforms. So she was like, oh, perfect, you're going to be battle ready. Or, go ahead, get changed, get them battle ready. And she just kind of threw around the term battle ready very grossly, in my opinion. It was, just kind of, I don't want to say icky, but that's all, like, it made me feel icky when I heard it, because I just felt like that was completely uncalled for. The men laughed it off, but as traumatic as battle really is, I don't think that's a term that you should be using with active soldiers comparing war to a halftime show. So the third example is Lynn and Oglesby's conversation. Oglesby tells Billy that Billy and Bravo's story is no longer their story when they're discussing making a movie, and they were unhappy with the price that they were going to be paid. Oglesby tells them that it's no longer their story, it is America's story. And that is just completely invalidating their entire experience, because I know from my perspective, I am not the one who fought in any battles. I am not the one who, did really anything. So it is not my story. The traumatic story, the brave story, that's not my story. It doesn't belong to me as an American. It doesn't belong to them. It belonged to Billy Lynn. So it belonged to Billy Lynn and the rest of Bravo. So I felt like that was just extremely inconsiderate. And then we get to the last example that I have, which is Faison. And this is a girl that Billy has, fallen head over heels for, envisions a life with, after only knowing for, a couple of hours. And at the end of the game, the men are leaving, and they're about to be redeployed, and he's kind of looking for another reason to stay besides his sister. So Billy sees Faison, and they kiss, and he says, I could just run away with you. And she seems so appalled by this, as if she was not going to be interested in him unless he was a soldier. So, that's the only reason she was really interested in him in the first place, which to me is just kind of feeding into the playthings term that I said earlier. It's, she only wants to be romantically involved with him if he's this decorated and honored man in the military. So the next one is PTSD. So today we hear a lot about PTSD in the members of the military, past and current. However, it was not a heavily covered issue until very recently. And Billy Lynn obviously suffers with PTSD, and both the movie and the novel make that extremely apparent. So some examples that I have, so Lynn's mother hitting the table when they were all at a family dinner. He had just returned from, Iraq, and they sat down for a family dinner, and there was an argument about the reason for war and if we should really be at war. And Billy's mother was just having none of it. She didn't want that to be, she didn't want to have that conversation. So she said stop over and over again, and then she got so frustrated that she hit the table. And everyone was kind of jarred, but Billy, stood up and was physically uncomfortable. And that was just kind of a PTSD trigger for him, I want to say. It really shocked him in the moment, if that makes sense. So then we have probably the largest example and trigger of PTSD in the whole movie, which is the halftime show. Because throughout the whole movie and the novel, we're seeing these flashbacks or reading these flashbacks from Billy about what's happening in war, and he's zoning out and seeing these flashbacks. However, during the halftime show, it affects the whole group. So the fireworks, the loud smoke machines, the people yelling, the instruments, it was all too much for all of them. And they all recognized how messed up it was that they were even asked to be there without being given any details about it. So, we actually see there was a physical altercation between one of the men in Bravo and another stage manager. And then there was a bigger altercation between most of the men in Bravo and also most of the stage crew. That actually continued throughout the movie, but that was one of the biggest examples. And actually, at the very end of the halftime show, Billy is supposed to stand completely still, and we see him zone out and have one of those flashbacks and have one of those PTSD memories of Shroom dying. So then at the very end is another example of PTSD. He's been talking to his sister, and he tells her that he is going to be redeployed. He's not going to look or try to be honorably discharged. So after that, he turns around to go back to this Hummer limo that all the men are in. And instead of that, we see a military vehicle, and he gets inside of it and he sees Shroom, and he has a conversation with Shroom. And I feel like this is very much PTSD manifesting in him and kind of giving him a conversation. It's his mind playing a trick on him. So we see that, and then he tells all the men that he loves them, like Shroom used to. So where does the movie excel? The movie is better at showing the effects of PTSD. The reader doesn't get the full visual of what Billy is going through. The very hard cuts between the football game and the war scenes demonstrates really well how sudden PTSD flashbacks are. And I personally felt like flashbacks kind of get lost in the novel, but the contrast is striking in the movie production. Obviously we're not having a war at a football game, and I agree, and the novel does the same thing, but I just really felt like that was a good, it was very sudden, and it showed PTSD and the effects of PTSD really, really well. But where does the novel exceed? So the novel was able to go into more detail about why people were so unhappy with the war. It was obvious that you would not want your sibling to put themselves in harm's way, but I think that the details behind the war are also important to why Catherine did not want her brother to return to Iraq. So, meaning, the politics and stuff like that. The novel went deeper than the movie into the politics behind the war and why many, many people were unhappy with the war. And the movie really only has the one scene at the kitchen table where it really fully delves into the political agenda of the war. But I do feel like there would be a great benefit in educating the viewer a bit more about that. Because unless you do your own research, you don't really understand why people are kind of mixed and Catherine is really, really fighting to not have her brother go back.